He used to boil young women in rose water to create a mesmerizing, almost supernatural perfume. Every few days, another body would surface in some alley or street corner, completely naked, hair cleanly shaved off. The entire city lived in terror. No matter how hard the authorities tried, they simply couldn't catch him. And now, his next target was a true enchantress, the daughter of the wealthiest family in Paris. Reaching her was like solving an impossible puzzle. But while attempting to get to her, he was finally captured. Before all the townspeople, he was sentenced to be executed on a cross in 2 days.
To hang until dead!
He now sits inside a dark cell, awaiting his punishment. Soon, several guards arrive, drag him out, and present him before the enraged crowd. His sentence: in 2 days, Jean will be tied to a cross, beaten ruthlessly with an iron rod, and then hanged until dead. Hearing this, the townspeople erupted in relief and celebration. That monster's name was Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, a man who wasn't born with an ordinary nose but with a terrifying gift, an extraordinary sense of smell so powerful that he could detect scents invisible to everyone else. From here, the story rewinds back to his childhood. This all began years ago in Paris. In a horribly reeking market, a woman tending her stall starts having contractions and gives birth right there, letting the baby drop to the ground. Since all her previous babies were stillborn, she assumes this one is dead too, so she cuts the cord and shoves him into the leftover fish guts before returning to work. This baby is Jean, and soon he takes his first breath, which exposes him to all the horrid smells from the market. When Jean cries for the first time, everyone in the market hears him and accuses the mother of attempting to kill him. The mother tries to flee, but the crowd catches her and she's executed. Afterward, Jean is sent to Madame Gallard's orphanage, where there are already so many children that they sleep in piles. When the baby is placed in one of these piles, the children are annoyed by his presence. A boy tries to poke him, but Jean grabs the finger and smells it, which creeps everyone out. The children decide to kill Jean with a pillow, and when he starts crying, Madame Gallard comes over to save him and whips the children for their misbehavior. Years pass, and by age 5, Jean still can't talk. The other kids think he's a weirdo and avoid him, so Jean spends his time using his unique talent. It turns out he has a superior sense of smell that allows him to identify any scent, even if it's far away or something that isn't supposed to smell. At this age, Jean still can't tell good from bad smells. He just enjoys exploring and discovering new scents. Eventually, Jean learns to talk and to identify objects around him with his eyes closed, using only his nose. By the time he turns 13, Madame Gallard sells Jean to Grimel, the owner of a tannery. Jean becomes an apprentice and Gallard gets some money, but on her way home, she's robbed and killed. Life expectancy in the tannery is 5 years, but Jean proves he's tough and works hard every day, dreaming of visiting the city someday to explore more scents. After several years of Jean working over 10 hours a day, Grimel finally takes him along to the city to make a delivery. As Jean walks through the crowded streets, he lets his nose absorb all the new scents, no matter if they're pleasant or foul. When Grimel gets busy making the delivery, Jean lets his nose guide him to a particularly wonderful scent coming from a shop. It's a perfume called Amour and Psyche, and as Jean watches the creator, he learns that scents can be blended to make new ones. Suddenly, Jean catches the sweetest scent he's ever encountered and instantly becomes fascinated with it. He runs after it and discovers it comes from a red-haired woman selling plums. He begins following her around town, and when he gets close enough, he sniffs her shoulder. The woman is startled and tries to communicate with him, but Jean doesn't answer. She tries offering him some plums, and Jean responds by burying his nose in her hand, causing her to get scared and run away. Refusing to give up, Jean tracks her scent. After dodging people throwing fireworks, he finds the woman sitting at a table. He sneaks behind her to smell her for a while until she turns around and sees him. The woman is about to scream, but Jean covers her mouth just in time and drags her into the shadows when he hears a noise. A couple walks by, and Jean waits for them to be gone before letting go of the woman, only to discover he's accidentally suffocated her to death. He isn't upset for long. Soon he's removing the woman's clothes so he can smell her from head to toe. However, as minutes pass, The body loses its living scent, and Jean despairs. That night, Grimal beats him up for running off. Then Jean can't sleep because he keeps thinking about the woman's scent and decides his goal in life is to find a way to preserve someone's scent so he never loses it again. Meanwhile, Giuseppe laments his lack of clients. He used to be the best perfumer in the country, but since his rival created Amore and Psyche, clients won't come to him anymore. Desperate to revive his business, Giuseppe tries to figure out the formula of Amore and Psyche, but no matter how much he smells it, he can't get it right. One night, Jean brings a delivery for Giuseppe, who allows him to enter his lab to drop off the order. Jean is amazed by all the ingredients and smells, and he can tell that Giuseppe has been experimenting with Amore and Psyche. He tells him what ingredients he's missing, claiming to be the best nose in Paris. Giuseppe is skeptical and tells Jean to prove himself. Without hesitation, Jean begins mixing all the ingredients, ignoring Giuseppe when he scolds him for not using the proper techniques. When Jean's done, Giuseppe is shocked to discover he's perfectly recreated Amore and Psyche, but Jean says it's not a good perfume yet. He quickly starts mixing again, but Giuseppe is angry that someone inexperienced has beaten him, so he kicks Jean out. Afterward, Giuseppe smells the second perfume Jean made, and the wonderful aroma makes him feel like he's in heaven. The next day, Giuseppe buys Jean from Grimal, who happily accepts the money and gets drunk with it. Meanwhile, Jean starts working as Giuseppe's apprentice, learning all about the trade and creating a variety of wonderful perfumes that push Giuseppe's shop back into being the best in town. Giuseppe teaches Jean that perfume is made of 12 notes and that a legend speaks of the perfect 13th essence that could be added to dominate the others, but it's never been found. These words make Jean think about the woman he killed, and that night, he dreams of her. Remembering his life goal, Jean asks Giuseppe to teach him how to preserve any scent. The next day, Giuseppe teaches Jean how to extract the essence of 10,000 roses by boiling them at the right temperature until the oil condenses and drops into a tiny flask. It takes a lot of patience, but eventually, the machine releases the rose oil, and Jean is so impressed that he starts experimenting on his own. He grabs random things from the street, like chains and a horseshoe, and puts them inside the device, hoping to capture their scents. In the morning, Giuseppe wakes up when he hears loud noises coming from his lab. He rushes there to discover Jean having a breakdown. The boy accuses him of lying because his system can't extract the smell of anything, just a few things. Giuseppe can't believe Jean has been trying to capture the scent of metals, which aren't supposed to smell. When Giuseppe checks inside the machine, he's horrified to discover Jean has put his cat in it, trying to extract its scent as well. Giuseppe yells at Jean, telling him he can't distill the scent of a living being, and suddenly Jean passes out. After such a revelation, Jean quickly falls ill. Giuseppe is devastated and pays for good doctors to care for Jean, but they can't even determine what's wrong with him. On his deathbed, Jean asks if there's any other method to extract a scent, so Giuseppe tells him about enfleurage, a technique only used in the city of Grasse. This information immediately helps Jean, and in just a few days, he's healthy again. Now Jean wants to travel to Grasse, but he'll need the proper paperwork, so Giuseppe grants it to him in exchange for 100 new perfume formulas. After Jean leaves, Giuseppe goes to bed feeling very happy, but suddenly his house collapses and kills him. On his way to Grasse, Jean finally gets to explore the countryside, and his mood greatly improves thanks to the pure air. Instead of taking the short roads through various towns, Jean decides to walk through the mountains to keep breathing clearly. He ends up climbing to the top of a mountain and hiding inside a cave, where for the first time he can only smell one thing, the scent of dead stone. He would have stayed longer if it wasn't for the dreams of the plum woman. When Jean finally comes out again, he washes his body in the rain and realizes that he doesn't have a scent like everybody else, making him feel like a nobody. At that moment, he swears he'll prove to the world that he's exceptional. Afterward, Jean finally keeps traveling, and when he's about to reach Grasse, he catches an amazing scent, even better than the plum woman's. A carriage suddenly passes by, and he discovers the scent belongs to the beautiful Laura. Excited, Jean runs all the way to Grasse and follows his nose until he reaches a fancy mansion. He sneaks inside the garden and watches Laura from afar. He gets as close as he can to smell her scent, but his time is cut short when her father, Rikiz, sends her back inside. The next day, Jean starts working in a perfume shop where he learns the art of enfleurage under the supervision of Druot. The process consists of pressing flowers into animal fat and boiling them in a large container to extract their essence. One night, a couple is fooling around in the barn, but the boy leaves when the girl teases him too much, and she ends up stuck. Soon Jean shows up pretending to help her, but he actually kills her. Moments later, the girl ends up covered in fat and inside the container as Jean hopes to extract her scent. In the morning, a woman comes by with a flower delivery, so Jean has to cover the container before the body is discovered. Druot almost catches him too, but Jean pretends he covered the container to protect the flowers from the sun. In the end, this process doesn't extract the girl's scent, so Jean has to think of something else. In the evening, he hires a street worker who brings her dog along. However, instead of doing the deed, he begins covering her in animal fat. When he takes out a blade to scrape off the fat, the woman freaks out and cancels their transaction. Jean won't give up, so he quickly kills her and carries on with his new technique. After cutting off her hair, he wraps her entire body in animal fat and a piece of cloth. A few hours later, Jean scrapes off the fat and puts it through a complicated process that finally extracts the scent of a human being. The next morning, while the locals find the abandoned body, Jean tests the scent by putting just a drop on his hand. The woman's dog immediately runs to him, thinking it has smelled its owner. Pleased with himself, Jean puts this scent in the first bottle out of 13, planning to find all the right notes for the perfect perfume. Sometime later, Jean sneaks into Laura's birthday party to spy on her. She and her friends decide to play hide and seek in the garden maze, and when Laura is alone, she can see Jean's shadow nearby. When he tries to catch her, she thinks it's part of the game and runs away, only to be caught by a friend instead. Jealous, Jean throws a rock to destroy the lamp above them, which sends Laura running again. Soon Rikiz ends the game, but the party's mood changes when they discover two girls are missing. Meanwhile, Jean is putting those two girls through the fat and wrap process to extract their scents, which he adds to his collection. When Druot comes over to yell at Jean for neglecting his work, he smells the amazing scent on Jean's hand and immediately becomes very docile. The next day, the bodies of the two girls are found in the river. The council calls for a meeting, and Rikiz asks for a curfew until the killer is caught, pointing out that all their daughters are in danger because, except for the street worker, all the other dead girls were pure. However, the council refuses because a curfew could push the town into bankruptcy. For the next few days, Jean continues to kidnap and kill untouched women to extract their scents, leaving the bodies in random spots when he's done. Soon the council agrees to impose a curfew and sends guards to patrol the streets, but this doesn't stop Jean, he just keeps on killing. The townspeople are consumed by fear and paranoia, so they start boarding up their houses and turning against anyone suspicious, even shooting at them. When Jean kills a nun, who is also his 12th victim, the bishop holds a mass to call the killer a demon who shall be excommunicated. The ceremony is interrupted by a man suddenly bursting in to announce the killer has been captured. Rikiz isn't convinced because the confession was obtained under torture and the details don't match the actual killings, but the council just wants to close this case, and the man is executed. Meanwhile, Jean mixes the 12 essences and is very pleased with the result, but he knows he's missing the final 13th note. He wants that final touch to be Laura, who is currently celebrating with the rest of the locals until Rikiz shows up to take her home. That night, Jean sneaks inside the mansion and approaches Laura while she sleeps. Suddenly, Rikiz wakes up and rushes to Laura's bedroom, but she's fine and alone. However, Rikiz notices the window is open. The next morning, Rikiz packs their things and leaves with Laura to keep her safe. Hoping to trick the killer, he sends out an empty carriage in the opposite direction while he and Laura travel by horse. However, Jean's nose immediately detects that Laura's scent is getting weaker, so he also packs his things and begins following her smell to track her down. Back in town, the street worker's dog is also sniffing things out and finds its owner's clothes buried in the dirt. This is noticed by Druot, who keeps on digging and soon finds all the dead women's clothes and hair. Sometime later, Rikiz and Laura arrive at a remote inn and rent all the rooms. Rickes chooses a room with no windows for Laura and locks her up for the night. Still tracking her scent, Jean finds the inn, sneaks through the servant's room, and steals the key from Richie's bedside table to finally reach Laura. When he's about to kill her, Laura opens her eyes and looks at him, making him hesitate. The next morning, Rickes checks on his daughter and is horrified to discover she's dead. Meanwhile, Jean finishes extracting Laura's essence and adds it to the other 12 to finally create the ultimate perfume. Before he can smell it properly, he's surrounded by soldiers and gets arrested, but he manages to hide the perfume in his pocket. Afterward, Rickes waterboards Jean to make him confess why he killed Laura, but Jean only answers, "I needed her." Back to the beginning, the day of Jean's execution arrives, and the whole town gathers to watch. When a council lord and a group of guards show up to take Jean, he opens the perfume bottle with a plan in mind. Moments later, a carriage arrives at the town square, and Jean comes out wearing the lord's clothes plus a few drops of his perfect perfume. As soon as the people near him smell him, they fall to their knees, amazed by his mere presence. Jean walks to the scaffold, and his scent is so intoxicating that the executioner immediately declares him innocent. Next, Jean puts some perfume on a handkerchief and starts waving it around to let the scent spread. The whole crowd falls into a state of absolute euphoria, and even the bishop gets on his knees, announcing that Jean is actually an angel. The crowd begins yelling and crying for Jean, who finally feels noticed and powerful. The only one who hasn't fallen for it is Rickes, who stands on a balcony that the perfume hasn't reached yet. Then Jean lets his handkerchief fly with the wind. When it falls into the crowd, it causes everyone to heat up and start doing the deed in a massive group frenzy. As he watches in shock, Jean imagines himself with the plum woman and realizes he hasn't known real love and never will, which makes him cry. Suddenly, Rickes gets on the scaffold, ready to finish the execution, but he's overtaken by the power of the perfume too and falls to his knees, calling Jean his son. A few hours later, the townspeople wake up and are overwhelmed with shame. Jean is nowhere to be seen, and Drouot is arrested instead, since the clothes and hair were found in his shop. After 14 hours of torture, Drouot confesses and is executed. Meanwhile, Jean returns to his smelly hometown. Since an existence without love is pointless, Jean stops in the middle of the street and empties the entire perfume bottle on his head. The scent is so powerful that it causes the locals to rush to him, piling on top of his body to devour him. The next morning, the only thing left of Jean are his clothes and a drop of perfume. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories. Thanks for watching.